Most men are not defeated by circumstances. They are worn down by what they feel about them. Anger feels like clarity. Fear feels like intuition. Hurt feels like truth. But feelings speak with urgency, not accuracy. When emotion becomes evidence, judgment weakens without notice. The discomfort you carry may not be a wound. It may be a warning about how you think. Control begins where reaction loses authority. Lesson 1. The first truth behind times. Your feelings are not an argument. Feelings don't matter. Times is uncomfortable because it removes a refuge many men quietly depend on. Emotion arrives fast. It feels undeniable. It demands recognition the moment it appears. Anger insists something is wrong. Anxiety insists something is dangerous. Resentment insists someone has crossed a line. Yet urgency has never been proof of accuracy. A loud alarm does not mean there is a fire. Sometimes it means the sensor is broken. Most conflicts begin long before words are spoken. They begin in interpretation. A message arrives late. A tone sounds indifferent. A look seems dismissive. The body reacts before the mind investigates. Heat rises in the chest. The jaw tightens. Meaning is assigned without evidence. In that moment, feeling replaces observation. The man no longer responds to reality. He responds to the story emotion constructed in seconds. History has already tested this pattern. Men who treated emotion as evidence acted quickly and regretted slowly. They spoke when silence would have preserved leverage. They accused when patience would have revealed misunderstanding. They walked away from opportunities because discomfort felt like danger. Emotion does not lie deliberately. It simply reports from incomplete information. Consider how often certainty appears strongest when knowledge is weakest. A man interrupted during a meeting assumes disrespect. Later, he learns the interruption saved the discussion from failure. A partner seems distant for a day, and suspicion fills the gap. Hours later, exhaustion explains everything. The feeling was real. The conclusion was not. Silence exposes this difference. When reaction pauses, details emerge that emotion ignored. Patterns become visible. Tone separates from intention. Context arrives late, but it arrives. The disciplined man understands that delay is not weakness. It is investigation. Many confuse suppression with control. They believe ignoring emotion creates strength. It does not. Buried emotion leaks through posture, sarcasm, impatience. Control is something else entirely. Control means allowing the feeling to exist without granting it authority. You notice anger without letting it write your words. You recognize fear without letting it choose your direction. One sentence survives time because it refuses decoration. Feelings describe pressure. They do not define truth. Modern culture rewards emotional immediacy. Outrage travels faster than reflection. Public reactions receive applause, while restraint is mistaken for indifference. But applause has never repaired a damaged decision. Calm men are often judged as detached because they refuse to perform certainty before understanding arrives. Ask yourself quietly, how many arguments began because something felt obvious? How many relationships weakened because assumption replaced inquiry? Emotion narrows vision. It selects details that justify itself and hides the rest. The more intense the feeling, the smaller the frame becomes. A disciplined man expands the frame. He asks questions no one hears. What am I missing? What evidence exists beyond this moment? Would this still appear true tomorrow morning? Distance changes proportion. What felt unbearable at midnight often looks ordinary in daylight. This is why restraint feels unnatural at first. Emotion promises relief through expression. Reaction offers immediate release. Yet relief is expensive when purchased with reputation, trust, or opportunity. Words spoken during disturbance rarely return alone. They bring consequence with them. The man who understands that feelings don't matter is not numb. He is selective. He listens to emotion as a signal, not a judge. And when the signal grows louder, he does not rush to defend it. He watches it carefully, because sometimes the strongest impulse is simply the mind asking to be examined a little longer. Lesson 2. The first principle that sustains times your feelings are not an argument feelings don't matter times is that intensity creates the illusion of certainty. The stronger the emotion, the more convincing the conclusion appears. A racing pulse feels like evidence. A tightened chest feels like confirmation. Yet, sensation has never been a method of verification. It is only a reaction to interpretation. Most men remember moments when anger felt righteous. Words came easily. Logic seemed sharp. Every sentence sounded justified inside the mind before it reached the air. Later, distance revealed gaps no one noticed at the time. Missing information, misheard tone, context ignored because urgency demanded action. Emotion did not fabricate the experience. It amplified a partial view until it resembled completeness. Consider how quickly discomfort demands explanation. Silence from a colleague becomes disrespect. A delayed payment becomes betrayal. A change in routine becomes rejection. The mind dislikes uncertainty, so emotion offers a shortcut. It fills empty spaces with assumption. The result feels stable because the feeling itself is strong. Strength of feeling quietly replaces strength of evidence. Time has proven this pattern repeatedly. Panic convinces investors to sell at the lowest moment. Pride convinces leaders to refuse correction until damage becomes public. Jealousy convinces partners to accuse before asking questions. The outcome rarely begins with malice. It begins with certainty born too early. Noise thrives on immediacy. Conversations collapse when emotion demands victory instead of understanding. Notice how arguments escalate. One man speaks from irritation, the other responds from offense. Neither examines the original issue anymore. They defend sensations rather than facts. Volume replaces clarity. Reaction replaces listening. When both sides feel intensely, neither side notices reality leaving the room. Calm disrupts this process, not because calmness is morally superior, but because it slows interpretation. Slowness allows contradiction to appear. Details that resist the emotional narrative become visible. Tone softens. Motive separates from assumption. Often the original problem shrinks once emotion loses momentum. There is a quiet question disciplined men learn to ask themselves. Why does this feel urgent right now? Urgency deserves suspicion. Genuine danger rarely announces itself through emotional drama alone. More often, urgency protects ego. Being ignored feels intolerable. Being corrected feels threatening. Being uncertain feels humiliating. Emotion rushes forward to restore comfort by declaring judgment finished. Intensity is persuasive because the body participates. Heat, tension, adrenaline. The experience feels physical, undeniable. But physical sensation does not guarantee intellectual accuracy. Fear during turbulence feels identical whether the aircraft is failing or simply passing through rough air. The body reacts to perception, not probability. One sentence deserves remembering. Loud emotions are often quiet misunderstandings wearing armor. Men who rely on feeling as argument eventually exhaust those around them. Every disagreement becomes personal. Every boundary feels hostile. Others learn that conversation carries risk because emotion may reinterpret neutral moments as attack. Trust erodes, not through cruelty, but through unpredictability. Restraint changes reputation without announcement. When a man pauses before responding, Others notice stability. He becomes difficult to provoke because reaction is not automatic. This does not remove emotion. It places distance between impulse and decision. In that distance, clarity has room to arrive. Ask yourself how many decisions were made simply to escape discomfort, messages sent too quickly, opportunities abandoned because doubt felt unbearable, apologies demanded before understanding existed. Relief arrived briefly, but consequence stayed longer. Emotion promised resolution and delivered complication. The disciplined man recognizes intensity as a signal to slow down rather than accelerate. When feeling becomes strongest, observation must become quieter. Because the moment emotion insists it is unquestionably right, is often the moment reality is waiting just outside the frame, patient enough to reveal itself only to those who refuse to hurry. Lesson 3. The first truth a man must confront if he accepts times: your feelings are not an argument. Feelings don't matter. Times is that reaction feels powerful because it removes effort. Judgment requires distance. Reaction requires only momentum. One listens, the other interrupts. And interruption always feels stronger in the moment. Most reactions begin with protection. Someone questions your work. A partner challenges a decision. A stranger speaks carelessly. The body interprets threat before the mind evaluates intention. Words gather quickly, shaped less by accuracy than by defense. You are no longer responding to what was said. You are responding to what it felt like to hear it. This is why reaction often sounds convincing to the person speaking it. Emotion organizes memory selectively. Past frustrations line up behind the present moment as reinforcement. A small disagreement suddenly carries the weight of years. Tone sharpens, certainty grows. The argument expands beyond proportion because feeling recruits history as evidence. Judgment moves differently. It delays ownership of meaning. Instead of asking how this affects me, it asks what actually happened. That question feels uncomfortable because it risks discovering error. Pride prefers immediacy. Distance feels like surrender. Yet distance is the only place accuracy survives. Watch conversations carefully. Reaction seeks victory. Judgment seeks orientation. One pushes forward, the other steps sideways. Reaction interrupts silence because silence threatens emotional momentum. Judgment allows silence because silence invites additional information. The difference is rarely visible from outside, but consequences reveal it later. History has never rewarded the fastest emotional response. Leaders who reacted publicly to insult often prolonged conflict. Fathers who reacted in anger created distance that apology struggled to repair. Men who reacted to fear abandoned paths that later proved safe. Reaction feels decisive, but decisiveness without clarity becomes expensive courage. There is a quiet reason reaction dominates modern life. Speed is admired. Immediate opinion receives attention. Hesitation is mistaken for weakness. A calm pause looks uncertain next to loud confidence. Yet uncertainty examined honestly produces stronger decisions than confidence built on assumption. Consider a simple moment. A message arrives late at night. Short words, no explanation. Reaction invents tone immediately. Disrespect, coldness, indifference. Sleep disappears while the mind constructs arguments no one has spoken yet. Morning arrives with clarification. Exhaustion caused the brevity. Nothing more. The conflict existed only in imagination, but the stress felt real enough to steal rest. One sentence remains worth carrying. Reaction protects ego. Judgment protects outcome. Many men confuse emotional honesty with emotional authority. They believe expressing what they feel automatically grants legitimacy to the conclusion attached to it. but honesty describes experience, not accuracy. Saying, "I feel disrespected," explains pressure inside the mind. It does not confirm disrespect occurred. Judgment separates signal from story. Anger may signal a boundary worth examining. Fear may signal preparation is incomplete. Sadness may signal loss, requires acknowledgement. Emotion offers direction toward inquiry, not permission for accusation. The disciplined man listens carefully, but refuses obedience. This restraint often appears cold to observers who rely on reaction as proof of authenticity. They mistake measured speech for indifference. They assume calm hides weakness. In truth, calm hides labor. Thoughtful response requires resisting the satisfaction of immediate release. Ask yourself, how often reaction created work that patience would have prevented? Explanations required after harsh words. Opportunities lost because pride rejected correction. Friendships strained by misunderstandings, allowed to grow unchecked. Reaction rarely ends where it begins. It expands outward, touching people who never participated in the original moment. Judgment feels slower because it accepts incomplete understanding temporarily. It tolerates ambiguity. It allows discomfort to remain unresolved long enough for truth to surface. That patience is rarely dramatic. It produces no applause. Often no one notices it at all. But inside that unnoticed space, a man learns something difficult. The strongest response is not the fastest one. And sometimes the most disciplined sentence is the one that never leaves the mouth, while the mind quietly asks whether the feeling speaking first has actually earned the right to be believed. Lesson 4. The first principle hidden inside times. Your feelings are not an argument. Feelings don't matter. Times reveals itself most clearly in conversation. Feelings rarely stay contained within a man. They travel through tone, posture, timing. Words become carriers. And once emotion enters dialogue as authority, discussion quietly turns into combat. Most arguments do not begin because two people disagree about facts. They begin because each person defends how the situation made them feel. One feels ignored, the other feels accused. Neither examines the original issue anymore. The conversation stops searching for understanding and begins searching for validation. At that moment, listening becomes dangerous, because listening might weaken emotional certainty. Notice how quickly language changes when emotion leads. Questions disappear. Statements harden. You always do this. You never listen. You don't respect me. Absolutes feel powerful because they simplify complexity. They remove nuance. But reality rarely survives inside absolutes. Human behavior contains contradiction, fatigue, misunderstanding. Emotion edits those details out because they interfere with momentum. History has proven something uncomfortable. Most damaged relationships were not destroyed by cruelty. They were exhausted by repeated emotional trials disguised as conversations. Each discussion became a courtroom where feelings acted as evidence and verdict simultaneously. No witness was allowed except memory selected under pressure. The problem is subtle. Feelings demand acknowledgement, and acknowledgement feels similar to agreement. When someone says they feel hurt, the listener often believes disagreement means denial of experience. So resistance grows, defensiveness rises. Two people begin protecting identity rather than examining reality. Silence behaves differently. Silence does not rush to interpret intention. It allows a sentence to exist without immediate reaction. Many men avoid silence because it feels like surrendering ground. Yet silence is not retreat. It is observation. When response slows, contradictions surface naturally. Tone softens because escalation loses rhythm without immediate opposition. Consider a workplace disagreement. A correction is offered during a meeting. One man hears improvement. Another hears humiliation. Emotion interprets exposure as attack. Reaction enters quickly. Voice sharpens. Later, both remember the same moment differently. One recalls helping, the other recalls betrayal. The facts did not change. Interpretation did. One sentence deserves permanence. Conversation dies the moment feeling replaces curiosity. Emotional authority encourages performance. Volume increases. Gestures expand. Each side attempts to prove sincerity through intensity. Yet, sincerity cannot repair misunderstanding alone. Two honest men can still destroy trust if honesty refuses examination. Emotion insists it already understands motive. Judgment waits to confirm. Modern culture rewards visible emotion. Outrage receives attention. Calm disagreement appears detached by comparison. But attention has never guaranteed accuracy. Loud certainty spreads faster than careful inquiry because noise demands less effort to consume. Ask yourself how often conversations escalated because relief felt urgent. Saying what you felt promised immediate release. Silence felt unbearable. Words arrived quickly, shaped by frustration rather than intention. Relief followed briefly. Then, consequence appeared. Distance grew. Apologies required explanation that patience might have prevented entirely. The disciplined man learns to separate expression from timing. He does not deny feeling. He questions its authority to lead dialogue. Sometimes the strongest sentence arrives hours later, refined by reflection instead of impulse. Sometimes clarity appears only after emotion loses urgency. Others may interpret this restraint as avoidance. They expect immediate emotional participation as proof of care. Yet participation without clarity creates confusion, disguised as connection. Calm men often carry the burden of being misunderstood because they refuse to argue from disturbance. There is a quiet danger when feelings dominate conversation. Each disagreement becomes cumulative. Past wounds attach themselves to present moments. Every discussion carries ghosts from earlier ones. Soon, no topic remains small enough to resolve easily. And in that growing weight, a man begins to notice something unsettling. The more urgently he tries to defend what he feels, the less anyone hears what he actually means, because emotion speaks loudly enough to fill the room long before understanding has a chance to enter. Lesson 5. The first truth that sharpens times your feelings are not an argument. Feelings don't matter. Times is the discipline of doubting your own emotional certainty, not denying emotion, not suppressing it, doubting it. Most men question others easily. Very few question the voice inside that speaks first. Emotion arrives wearing confidence. It rarely introduces itself as possibility. It says, "This is wrong. This is unfair. This person meant harm." The speed of that conclusion feels like intelligence. Instinct feels efficient, but efficiency without examination creates a fragile form of certainty, one that collapses the moment new information appears. The ego prefers emotional certainty because it protects identity. If anger is unquestionably justified, there is no need to reconsider behavior. If resentment is unquestionably deserved, apology becomes unnecessary. Doubt threatens comfort because doubt invites responsibility. Responsibility demands adjustment. Adjustment requires effort. History has already shown the cost of unquestioned certainty. Leaders convinced of betrayal started wars, later revealed to be misunderstandings. Friends separated because pride interpreted silence as rejection. Opportunities disappeared because fear disguised itself as intuition. In each case, the feeling felt honest. Honesty alone did not make it accurate. Doubt is often misunderstood as weakness. Men are taught that conviction signals strength. Hesitation appears uncertain beside bold reaction. Yet, hesitation, examined carefully, is not hesitation at all. It is inspection. A disciplined pause asks whether the emotion understands the entire situation or only a fragment shaped by memory and expectation. Consider how often past experiences rewrite present moments. A man once betrayed becomes suspicious easily. A man once ignored hears dismissal quickly. Emotion borrows yesterday's pain and applies it to today's conversation without permission. The reaction feels protective, even wise. But protection based on outdated information quietly damages what no longer resembles the original threat. There is a quiet question disciplined men ask themselves when emotion grows loud. What else could this mean? That question interrupts momentum. It forces imagination away from accusation toward possibility. Perhaps the delay was exhaustion. Perhaps the criticism was clumsy concern. Perhaps discomfort signals growth rather than danger. One sentence remains worth remembering. Certainty is most dangerous when it feels effortless. Modern life encourages immediate interpretation. Messages arrive constantly. Tone disappears behind screens. Ambiguity multiplies. Emotion fills gaps faster than reason can investigate them. A short reply becomes disrespect. A delayed answer becomes avoidance. Entire narratives form before verification occurs. The mind protects itself from uncertainty by inventing completion. Doubt slows this invention. It refuses to let emotion finalize judgment prematurely. This restraint feels unnatural because emotion promises relief through conclusion. Once the mind declares understanding finished, tension fades briefly. But false relief demands payment later when correction becomes unavoidable. Many men fear that doubting emotion means betraying authenticity. They worry restraint will make them passive or silent. The opposite happens. When emotion loses authority, speech becomes precise. Words carry weight because they survive examination before leaving the mouth. Others begin to trust what is said because reaction no longer changes direction unpredictably. Relationships change quietly under this discipline. Conflict loses urgency because accusation waits for evidence. Apology becomes easier because ego no longer defends every sensation as truth. Respect grows without announcement. People sense stability even when they cannot explain why. Ask yourself how many decisions were defended simply because admitting doubt felt humiliating. How often pride protected a feeling long after evidence weakened it. Emotion rarely admits error willingly. It prefers escalation to reconsideration. The louder it becomes, the harder it feels to step back. But stepping back reveals something unexpected. Most emotional certainty dissolves under patient observation. Details appear that soften conclusions. Motives become less hostile. Situations grow more complex than the first interpretation allowed. And in that complexity, a man discovers a discipline few pursue willingly. He learns to listen carefully, even to himself. Because sometimes the most persuasive argument he hears all day is the one forming inside his own mind, asking to be trusted long before it has earned belief. Lesson 6. The first truth a man encounters when living times: your feelings are not an argument. Feelings don't matter. Times is the silent cost of making decisions while disturbed. Emotion does not simply color perception. It alters proportion. Small risks appear enormous. Serious dangers appear manageable if they promise relief from discomfort. Judgment bends toward escape rather than outcome. Disturbance feels urgent because the mind seeks resolution, not accuracy. Anxiety demands movement. Anger demands response. Sadness demands withdrawal. Each feeling offers a direction that promises immediate quiet inside the chest. The problem is simple: relief and correctness rarely travel together. Many men recognize this only after consequence arrives. A resignation letter sent during frustration. A relationship ended during exhaustion. Money spent to silence restlessness rather than solve necessity. In each case, the decision felt decisive, even courageous. Later reflection exposes something different. The decision solved a feeling, not the situation. Time has proven that disturbed minds negotiate poorly with reality. Fatigue narrows patience. Pride exaggerates insult. Fear invents catastrophe. When emotion intensifies, imagination fills space faster than observation. Possibility shrinks. Options disappear. The path chosen feels inevitable because alternatives were never allowed to remain visible long enough to be considered. Consider late-night thinking. Problems grow heavier in darkness. Conversations replay endlessly. Words imagined from others sound sharper than anything actually spoken. At 2 a.m, conclusions feel permanent. By morning, many dissolve without effort. Circumstances did not change. Perspective returned. Disturbance accelerates commitment. A man promises things he cannot sustain because guilt demands repair immediately. Another refuses compromise because anger demands dominance. Both believe action demonstrates strength, yet strength without clarity becomes a contract written in fog. One sentence deserves permanence. Decisions made for relief often purchase regret. Modern life rarely encourages delay. Speed signals competence. Immediate answers appear confident. Waiting looks uncertain beside urgency. Yet most irreversible mistakes share one similarity. They were made while emotion insisted patience was impossible. There is a reason experienced men postpone important conversations when disturbed. Not avoidance, preservation. Words spoken while anger leads rarely represent intention accurately. They represent pressure seeking release. Once spoken, they acquire weight independent of mood. Others respond to the words themselves, not the temporary emotion that produced them. Silence during disturbance feels uncomfortable because it denies emotional momentum. The body remains tense without discharge. Thoughts circle without conclusion, but this discomfort performs necessary work. It allows intensity to fade enough for proportion to return. What seemed catastrophic becomes manageable. What seemed trivial sometimes reveals seriousness only after calm arrives. Ask yourself how often you mistook emotional exhaustion for clarity. How many plans felt brilliant during frustration, but fragile once energy returned? How many confrontations felt necessary until understanding appeared hours later? Emotion shortens timelines. Everything feels urgent because remaining still exposes vulnerability. Disturbance also manipulates memory. Only supporting evidence appears accessible. Past successes vanish during fear. Past kindness disappears during resentment. The mind edits history to justify present emotion. Decisions built on edited memory rarely survive contact with reality. Disciplined men develop an unusual habit. They distrust conclusions reached during emotional peaks, not because emotion is meaningless, but because emotion magnifies distortion. They wait deliberately, sometimes hours, sometimes days. They allow sleep to interrupt momentum. They allow conversation with calmer minds. Distance restores scale. Others may interpret delay as indecision. They expect immediate certainty, yet certainty formed under pressure often conceals insecurity rather than strength. Patience appears slow only to those uncomfortable with uncertainty. In that waiting space, something subtle happens. Desire to react weakens. Curiosity returns. Questions appear that anger never allowed. Motives seem less obvious. Solutions widen quietly. And a man begins to understand something rarely taught openly. The greatest danger is not feeling strongly. It is believing strong feeling deserves immediate obedience, especially when the decision waiting in front of him may shape consequences long after the emotion that demanded action has already disappeared. Lesson 7. The first truth revealed by times, your feelings are not an argument, feelings don't matter, times, is that calm men are often misunderstood because they refuse to negotiate with emotion in public. Restraint unsettles people who rely on visible reaction as proof of sincerity. When anger is expected and does not arrive, suspicion fills the silence. Most environments reward emotional participation. Outrage signals loyalty. Excitement signals engagement. Immediate sympathy signals belonging. A man who listens quietly instead of reacting disrupts that rhythm. Others begin searching for explanation. Is he indifferent? Is he arrogant? Does he not care? Calm becomes misinterpreted because it denies emotional choreography everyone else has agreed to perform. The misunderstanding grows because restraint looks effortless from the outside. No one sees the internal labor required to remain measured while provocation presses forward. Words appear easily inside the mind. Retorts form quickly. Pride suggests correction. Emotion offers satisfaction through response. Choosing silence in that moment is not absence of feeling. It is refusal to outsource judgment to discomfort. History has repeatedly shown that composure attracts projection. People assign motive to quiet men because uncertainty feels threatening. If anger appears, it can be managed. If emotion becomes visible, it can be negotiated. Calm provides nothing to push against. Without reaction, others confront their own escalation alone. Consider a workplace disagreement. Voices rise around a table. Accusations sharpen. One man waits. He listens longer than expected. Someone interprets that pause as calculation. Another interprets it as weakness. Yet often, the quiet man is simply separating fact from tone. He refuses to answer emotion with emotion because confusion multiplied never becomes clarity. One sentence remains worth carrying. Calm is not coldness. It is containment. Many men abandon restraint because misunderstanding feels unfair. They want recognition for patience. They want acknowledgement that silence required effort. But dignity rarely announces itself successfully. The moment restraint seeks applause, it becomes performance rather than discipline. Modern culture amplifies this pressure. Reaction travels faster than reflection. Social spaces reward immediacy. Opinions appear seconds after events occur. Delay feels dangerous because silence risks being interpreted as agreement or opposition without permission. The calm man accepts this discomfort. He understands that explanation offered too early often traps him inside positions formed before understanding exists. There is also a quieter cost. Emotional people sometimes push harder when they encounter restraint. They repeat accusations louder. They attempt provocation because reaction would confirm influence. Remaining calm in those moments feels isolating. Others appear united by shared intensity, while patience stands alone. Ask yourself how often you reacted simply to avoid misunderstanding. How many arguments you joined because silence felt socially unsafe. How many statements you defended not because they were accurate, but because retreat would appear weak. Reputation built through reaction demands constant maintenance. Restraint changes reputation slowly. Over time, others notice predictability. Words spoken rarely require correction. Promises hold weight because they were not made during excitement. Conflict decreases not because disagreement disappears, but because others sense resistance to escalation. Some admire it quietly, others resent it openly. Misunderstanding never fully disappears. Calm men are called distant. reserved, difficult to read. Yet, emotional transparency alone has never guaranteed wisdom. Loud sincerity still produces reckless decisions when thought arrives too late. There is a strange freedom hidden inside this discipline. When approval no longer depends on visible reaction, choices widen. A man stops performing emotional alignment for comfort. He listens longer, speaks later, withdraws when conversation becomes noise rather than inquiry. And in those moments, he notices something unsettling. Many conflicts lose interest in him entirely once reaction disappears, because emotion often searches less for truth than for participation. And without participation, the performance struggles to continue long enough to justify itself. Lesson 8. The first truth sharpened by times: your feelings are not an argument. Feelings don't matter. Times is that many decisions are not driven by truth or necessity, but by the quiet hunger for relief. Discomfort presses inward. Tension gathers in the chest. Thought becomes restless. The mind begins searching not for accuracy, but for escape. And escape often disguises itself as certainty. Relief feels productive. Ending a conversation quickly feels decisive. Agreeing simply to end pressure feels mature. Walking away feels strong. Yet, relief solves sensation, not consequence. The moment tension disappears, emotion declares victory. Reality waits patiently for the cost to arrive later. Most men recognize this pattern privately. A difficult message sits unanswered because anxiety whispers that silence will calm the moment. Temporary quiet follows. Then complication grows. A postponed responsibility becomes heavier. Avoidance offered comfort briefly, but demanded interest afterward. Relief rarely forgives delay. History has shown that comfort pursued too early weakens judgment. Leaders avoided difficult truths to preserve stability and multiplied disaster. Fathers avoided hard conversations to preserve peace and watched distance grow silently. Men ignored warning signs in business because optimism felt better than preparation. Emotion seeks equilibrium quickly. Reality operates without urgency. Consider how often arguments end without resolution simply because exhaustion replaces understanding. Two people stop speaking not because clarity arrived, but because continuing feels unbearable. Both walk away, convinced they protected dignity. Days later, resentment remains intact because nothing changed except volume. One sentence deserves remembering. Relief is often the disguise worn by avoidance. Modern life accelerates this habit. Endless distraction offers immediate emotional anesthesia. Scrolling replaces reflection. Entertainment replaces discomfort. Quick agreement replaces honest disagreement. Every small escape teaches the mind that tension must disappear immediately. Patience becomes unfamiliar. Endurance feels unnecessary. But discomfort performs a function many refuse to examine. It signals unfinished work. Fear may indicate preparation is incomplete. Guilt may indicate responsibility remains unanswered. Frustration may reveal expectation colliding with reality. When relief becomes the goal, inquiry stops. The signal is silenced before meaning emerges. A man who treats feeling as argument often defends relief aggressively. He insists conversation end now. He insists decisions happen immediately. He insists closure without examination. Others sense urgency but cannot explain it. They feel pushed toward conclusions not yet understood. Ask yourself, how many commitments were made simply to end awkwardness? Invitations accepted to avoid disappointment. Promises offered to quiet guilt. Purchases made to quiet restlessness. Each moment delivered calm for a short while. Later came fatigue, obligation, or regret. Relief borrowed peace from the future. Discipline interrupts this borrowing. It allows discomfort to remain present long enough to reveal instruction. Sitting with uncertainty feels unnatural because nothing appears to change externally. Inside, however, perception reorganizes slowly. Questions replace assumptions. Emotion loses sharpness. Solutions emerge that urgency would never have allowed. Others may interpret this patience as hesitation. They expect visible progress, yet movement, chosen only to escape pressure, often travels in the wrong direction quickly. Stillness chosen for clarity appears slower, but prevents unnecessary return. There is also a deeper risk hidden inside constant relief-seeking. Identity begins shaping itself around avoidance. A man avoids confrontation long enough that honesty feels aggressive. He avoids responsibility long enough that effort feels oppressive. Emotion trains expectation quietly until discipline feels foreign. The disciplined man does something unusual when discomfort rises. He asks whether the urge to act comes from necessity or from the desire to stop feeling what he feels. That question removes momentum. Sometimes nothing changes immediately. The tension remains, and inside that tension he discovers something difficult to admit. Many problems were never as urgent as emotion insisted, and many solutions only became visible after he refused to chase comfort long enough for truth to step forward without needing to compete against the noise of escape. Lesson 9. The first truth demanded by times: your feelings are not an argument. Feelings don't matter. Times is the difference between emotional honesty and emotional authority. Many men believe that because a feeling is genuine, the conclusion attached to it must also be valid. The experience feels inseparable from the judgment. Yet, sincerity describes what is happening inside you. It does not confirm what is happening outside you. Emotional honesty has value. It recognizes pressure without disguise. A man admits he feels anger, fear, jealousy, disappointment. Nothing false exists in that admission. Denial rarely produces clarity, but authority begins when emotion claims interpretation as fact. I feel ignored becomes you disrespected me. I feel uncertain becomes this plan will fail. The transition happens quietly. Observation turns into accusation without evidence ever being examined. History has shown how easily this confusion damages trust. Honest feeling invites conversation. Emotional authority demands agreement. Others sense the difference immediately. One opens inquiry, the other closes it. When feeling becomes verdict, disagreement appears cruel rather than thoughtful. Dialogue collapses because one side defends reality while the other defends identity. Consider relationships where conflict repeats endlessly. One partner explains emotion repeatedly. The other attempts explanation. Each attempt sounds like dismissal because emotion expects validation, not investigation. Both become exhausted, not because honesty exists, but because authority replaced curiosity. The argument stops being about what happened and becomes about whose experience controls the narrative. One sentence remains worth remembering. Feeling explains experience. Evidence explains reality. Modern language encourages confusion between the two. Expressions of emotion are often treated as conclusions rather than beginnings. Social environments reward intensity because intensity appears authentic. Calm questioning feels intrusive beside passionate certainty. Yet authenticity without examination easily becomes manipulation without intention. A man ruled by emotional authority often believes he is protecting truth. In reality, he protects comfort. If feeling alone determines judgment, correction becomes impossible. New information threatens identity rather than improving understanding. Pride attaches itself to sensation because admitting error feels like betrayal of self. Workplaces reveal this pattern clearly. A colleague feels overlooked during a project discussion. Instead of asking for clarification, resentment grows silently. Motivation fades, cooperation weakens. Later, the truth appears simple. Others assumed competence required less supervision. The injury existed, but the meaning assigned to it distorted the situation. Ask yourself how often you defended a conclusion simply because abandoning it would invalidate how strongly you felt earlier. How many conversations extended because pride resisted recalibration? Emotion dislikes revision. It prefers escalation because escalation protects continuity. Emotional honesty behaves differently. It allows statement without accusation. I feel frustrated invites exploration. You always undermine me invites defense. One acknowledges internal experience. The other assigns motive without confirmation. The difference appears small in language, but enormous in consequence. Disciplined men learn to separate the two carefully. They respect emotion as information about themselves. Fatigue may signal overextension. Anger may signal violated expectation. Fear may signal uncertainty requiring preparation. Emotion becomes a question directed inward rather than a weapon directed outward. Others sometimes interpret this restraint as emotional distance. They expect immediate alignment with feeling because shared intensity appears like loyalty. Yet, loyalty without accuracy corrodes slowly. Agreements built on assumption collapse once contradiction appears. There is a strange humility required here. Accepting that strong emotion may still misunderstand reality feels uncomfortable. The ego resists it. Certainty feels safer than revision. But revision protects relationships, reputation, and judgment far more reliably than stubborn sincerity ever has. And a man eventually notices something difficult to ignore. The more carefully he separates what he feels from what is actually happening, the less often he needs to defend himself later. Because truth requires far less maintenance than conclusions built primarily to protect the emotional weight carried in a single moment. Lesson 10. The first truth that completes times your feelings are not an argument. Feelings don't matter. Times. Is that restraint becomes the strongest form of speech precisely because it refuses urgency. Most men believe strength appears through declaration, through explanation, through winning the moment. Yet, history has repeatedly shown that words spoken at the wrong time weaken authority more than silence ever could. Emotion demands expression because expression promises relief. Anger wants correction now. Hurt wants acknowledgement now. Pride wants defense now. The impulse feels honest because pressure inside the body seeks exit. But speech, shaped by disturbance, carries fragments of the disturbance with it. Tone sharpens, meaning distorts. Even correct words arrive contaminated by urgency. Many conversations fail, not because truth was absent, but because timing betrayed it. Advice offered while someone feels accused becomes insult. Correction delivered during humiliation becomes hostility. Even kindness, spoken during another man's anger, sounds like condescension. Emotion changes how words are received as much as how they are spoken. Consider how often arguments continue simply because neither side allows silence long enough for perspective to return. Each sentence attempts to repair the last one. Explanations multiply. Voices rise. Eventually, exhaustion replaces understanding. Both believe they defended themselves. Neither remembers the original issue clearly. Time has proven something uncomfortable. Silence forces reality to continue without performance. When a man refuses immediate reaction, the situation reveals itself further. Others speak more. Contradictions appear. Motives expose themselves naturally. What required argument begins resolving through observation alone. One sentence survives because it refuses decoration. Silence is not absence, it is selection. Restraint does not mean avoidance. Avoidance hides from consequence. Restraint waits for proportion. The difference becomes visible later. Avoidance leaves problems untouched. Restraint returns with precision when emotion no longer controls direction. The calm response delivered later often carries more authority than 10 urgent explanations offered earlier. Modern environments struggle with this discipline. Instant responses dominate communication. Messages expect immediate replies. Public opinion forms before facts stabilize. Silence feels dangerous because others may interpret it incorrectly. Yet reacting to prevent misunderstanding often creates deeper misunderstanding instead. Ask yourself, how many times explanation made things worse simply because emotion insisted clarity could not wait? How often apologies sounded defensive because shame still guided them? How many confrontations escalated because pride refused delay? Words spoken early rarely remain alone. They invite reaction, shaped by the same disturbance that created them. Restraint changes presence. Others notice that provocation fails to produce predictable reaction. Conversations slow naturally because urgency finds no partner. Some grow uncomfortable, others grow respectful. Authority appears quietly when speech becomes rare enough to matter. There is also a deeper shift inside the man himself. Silence reveals thoughts previously hidden beneath reaction. Without immediate expression, emotion loses disguise. Anger sometimes exposes fear. AV. Certainty sometimes exposes insecurity. The absence of noise allows self-observation without interruption. Critics may call restraint cold, detached, unemotional. Yet, emotional performance has never guaranteed wisdom. Loud sincerity still produces permanent damage when judgment arrives too late. Calm does not erase feeling. It chooses when feeling deserves a voice. In the end, the disciplined man understands something rarely celebrated publicly. Speaking less does not mean thinking less. It means refusing to let discomfort dictate meaning. It means allowing truth to mature before presenting it to others. And as silence settles long enough for emotion to lose urgency, he begins to notice that many battles dissolve without effort at all, because the strongest argument was never spoken aloud, only carried long enough for reality itself to answer what feeling once insisted required defense. If this message unsettled you, keep it. Discomfort is often the beginning of clarity. Most people look for words that agree with them. Here, you will hear words that demand something from you. If you value discipline over noise, subscribe, not for motivation, for perspective that endures when emotion fades. New reflections arrive for those willing to think longer, speak less, and act with intention. Stay if you are prepared to listen without defense. Leave if you only want comfort. The choice, as always, is quiet.